Short stories. The hidden feelings of a wife. It was noon by the time Karen got around to the dishes. Ted would want lunch any minute, and there she was up to her elbows in soapsuds and dirty plates. A real woman would have timed this better, she thought. At least the water was in the sink, and she could add the lunch dishes in after Ted had eaten. She had a specific order that she did the dishes in, learned 6 billion years ago in a home economics class when they still taught things like how to vacuum in a house with wall-to-wall carpeting, how to sew an invisible hem, what constituted a well-balanced breakfast, and what order to wash your dishes in: glasses, porcelain, plastic, flatware, silverware, with pots and pans pulling up the end. If the dishes were done when Ted ate, then she could start over again, with his glass, plate, etc. If he finished before she was done, then the order would be skewed, maybe the plate mixed in with the flatware, or the fork being stuck with the pots. It would never do, would it? For a moment the conundrum seized her, and she thought once and for all she would be discovered to be the fraud she was. The household police would come into the house, wipe your feet, and point their guns at her. "She's a whore," they would scream, and she would have to go with them. Karen decided that she would feed Ted after she did the dishes, and start all over again. With his, sometimes she had a great deal of trouble being organized. Other times, like today, she would whiz through the house, having the dishes done, the carpet vacuumed, and a load of laundry in the dryer before noon. Those were the days that she kept a list, a written reminder of what she had to do, a note to herself to keep on trucking. Don't let the bastards get you down, act normal. Once, she remembered, this guy and her were walking down the street. She was drunk. She couldn't remember if she'd even known at the time if the guy was drunk or not, but they were walking down the street at about 4 in the morning, and he saw someone he knew, and he said to her, "Sure, act normal." She tried at it was 1:30 and she was doing Ted's dishes and he said to her, "Didn't you just do the dishes?" And the conundrum seized her again, and she wondered if she wasn't supposed to do dishes more than once a day, if it was suspicious, if she would be caught, found out, taken, act normal. She looked at him and he was smiling, amused at her. Oh, this was one of the things he considered her idiosyncrasies. She relaxed, let out a breath. She giggled. "Well, you know," she said. He kissed her on her forehead and said he was going out to the garage. He gave her upper arm a little squeezy in his way past her and she felt so much better, and it was okay. She was happy. Yes, the bell on the dryer went and that was her second load of laundry that day. She was a successful housewife, getting her work done. She let herself feel it for a moment, imagined the self-sacrificing satisfaction of children running in and out, and her thinking about making something special for supper because they were celebrating a small occasion in a normal life, a goal scored in hockey, a hockey mom, someone getting their ears pierced, an A in science. She should cut her hair short. So far she just hadn't gotten around to it. Besides, Ted liked it long. These days she wore it up in a ponytail, or sometimes she curled it so that the sides framed her face and made her look slightly, and from an angle, like Audrey Hepburn in Roman Holiday. On those days she always had a list, and always got the work done, and usually felt exactly as she should by the time night fell and she and Ted were in bed, lying close but not touching, and she was going over the day in her mind, giving herself good and bad marks, A in house science, A in drama. At night, she let herself be. The funny thing was, she had expected the guilt. She had prepared herself long before the ring was on her finger, but the plan was in her pocket, that she would feel bad from time to time, as though she was feeding Ted a line, betraying him. That long ago she had still had a certain opinion of men, and it had been easier to warn him silently, caveat emptor, imagine his mother should have brought him up smarter, some mothers do raise fools, etc. He had, after all, been lumped in with the others, as a member of the sex that she had to put up with, work with, be with, but shedded tea have to like it. It was like faking an orgasm, something she was adept at. Could she fake it for the rest of her life? That had been the only concern she'd had then. Not getting caught. She had been prepared for the guilt. The guilt was something she had simply learned to live with, now, and she barely felt it. It was like having bunions and faking orgasms. How long could she do it? Forever. She had not been prepared for the mind-numbing boredom that seemed to accompany the safety. She had also not been prepared for Ted to become a person to her, to lose his status as man and become lover, friend, victim. At night she listened to him sleep, and if she was feeling okay, if she'd had a good day, maybe she'd changed the sheets that morning and she could smell the faintly present fabric softener, the liquid kind, not drier sheets, and could feel the cool softness, the clean feeling. Then she let herself smile while listening. His breath would go in and after a long time, it would come out. Sometimes he was disturbed in his sleep and his breathing became erratic, or he would mumble and rustle, and she would wonder if he was dreaming of her. Karen rarely fell asleep before 2. She had a lot of thinking to do before she fell asleep, like that poem, miles to go before I sleep, miles to go before I sleep. Except the poem made it sound clean and good-hearted, the way a day of hard work felt after the fact. The problem was, her miles to go were fraught with snakes and awfuls and bads and secrets. Before she could sleep she had to convince herself that no one had read those things on her during the day, during an unprotected moment, say when she was dusting a window ledge and the motion reminded her of something bad. Did it show on her face? Like this one time she was in the back seat with her friend's date. They were smoking a joint and it was about 10 at night and they were waiting for her friend who had gone into this building to score some beans, and she and this guy smoked the dope and she gave him a hand job. The motion was just like dusting a window ledge. On Tuesdays Karen helped at the old folks' home. Jane Mayers, who had a 4-year-old, asked her to help out at the co-op daycare in the neighborhood. Karen had told her she just didn't feel comfortable around small children just yet. It was one of the many convincing lies she could have told, and had actually thought of. Well, you know Jane, Ted and I are still trying, and sometimes it's hard to be around the little ones. Sympathetic pats on the arm. It's just that I'm not used to children, Jane, and I don't seem to have the patience just yet. Maybe when I have some of my own. Understanding and slight envy. Fact is, there were no children in my life for so long, what with working and all, I just don't know how to deal with them. Obvious envy followed by self-serving contempt for childless by-choice women. What she had ended up saying was that she just wasn't comfortable with small children, but she said it in a self-deprecating way so that Jane would assume something kinder than a lack of patience or affection for children. It was very dangerous to mention past careers since past careers might be remembered and asked about, or worse, just remembered by her. Tuesdays were good, long and good. Karen did the dishes in the morning, after Ted had left for work. Sometimes she cried if she did the dishes in the morning. Ted liked to make love best in the morning, and somehow the cleanliness and simplicity of making love to her husband and doing the dishes made her weep with self-loathing. But it was better once she was in the shower and thinking about one day when she would be old and the past would really be the past and someone would be preparing to forgive her, or she would die and her secrets would die with her. There was an old woman in the home named Mrs. Taylor. Karen called her Margaret when they were alone, but when they were in the lounge or lunchroom, Karen was supposed to call her Mrs. Taylor because all the nurses did. Mrs. Taylor was 90. Karen liked her best because she could almost read the death on Margaret's face, see the peace about to be there, the relief in sight, from holding in your breath, keeping all those secrets inside. Margaret would soon die, and let out her breath. Karen sometimes imagined that she was Margaret and peace was in sight. But to Margaret, Karen was just another worker who had some funny stories. The mind-numbing boredom was never more than an inch under the surface of her skin. Ted? He was reading the newspaper. He didn't look up, but just tilted his head so that she would know he was paying attention, without really having to. It was cute. It was what Karen imagined husbands doing. At 10 o'clock would turn the news on. On Wednesdays he watched Star Trek, and she liked Roseanne on Tuesdays. He said, I think I'm going to go for a walk. Was that right? Did people really get some air in real life, or was that just for TV? How was the grammar? She didn't say Gowan, she said going. Sure honey, he answered. As though it were nothing. Act normal. Karen and Ted lived in a small semi-suburb, where the people who wanted to live in the suburbs lived, the people who couldn't quite afford the suburbs, but still had decent lives and jobs, and some kids that needed aid sent school where they didn't teach swearing and safe sex, and where a kid could still get through grade 6 without smoking. Once, she stole a pack of cigarettes off a table at a party, and lied when confronted. "Fuck you," she said to the guy. She said they were hers. They had just been opened. She smoked the whole pack. Karen stood outside the store. It was open 24 hours because they weren't exactly in the suburbs. It was the sort of place you'd imagine getting robbed, or a woman being abducted from. If some guy mistook her for some fragile little housewifey, he would be in for a big surprise. Shedded T have a knife on her, but she wasn't afraid to gouge some guy's eyes out. She would love it. As she approached the pool of light thrown out in a wide arc from the store window, and from the outside lights in the parking lot, and the sign, she realized that if she gouged his eyes out, she didn't think she would be able to stop there. All the secrets would come out and turn into madness, and she would rip his skin off with her bare hands and tear his insides out and punch and punch and punch. "Marlboro Golds," she said to the man behind the counter. She picked up a package of matches from the counter. She didn't know this man. She rarely came to the store at night. He wouldn't know her. She suddenly realized that if Jane or Louise or Dana came into the store, they would see her buying cigarettes, and they knew she didn't smoke. "What else are you lying about?" "Wait a sec," she said to the man. She went to the sliding door fridge at the back of the store and bought a small container of half-and-half cream for the coffee in the morning. If they saw her, she could say, "Oh, I've just had this craving for cream in my coffee," and they would smile and wonder if she was expecting, or maybe even say it. "Maybe you're pregnant." Then they would laugh. The man put the cigarettes and cream into a paper bag. She smiled and said thank you, not forgetting her manners. That pleased her, but it didn't make up for the cigarettes. Outside, the air was cooler and less stifling than in the store. Outside, the air belonged to everybody, not just people who belonged in the store. Late at night, in the suburbs, there was no real place she could go to smoke a cigarette. She only wanted to have one, and then she would throw the pack away. She just needed to have one. She wasn't addicted anymore. She just needed to have a cigarette. She hadn't smoked in 8 months, and had no intention of blowing everything for one cigarette. She took the road that ran behind the store, the darker place where a car full of men would be parked, ready to abduct her, and they would get a healthy surprise. There was no one there. The road went all the way to the highway, past the houses almost, into the industrial park, where the huge mountainous buildings would be dark and quiet and frightening even at night when empty with their power. When she was past the last house before the industrial park, she was past any house that had anyone she knew in it. She stuck the cream and bag into her jacket, stuffing it hard into the pocket, forcing it in a way that quality-conscious housewives, with an eye for longevity and getting their money's worth, would never do to a jacket. She was too far away from the houses to remember that. She unraveled the cellophane from the cigarette pack, crumpling it up and stuffing it into the other pocket. She did remember that it could be found there, if Ted went looking for something or other in her pockets. After all, they were married and they had no secrets from each other, except some, and he could surely look in her pockets for the car keys or some change for the parking meter, couldn't he? She tossed the cellophane into the wind. It was so quiet, she could hear it rustling on the concrete of the sidewalk as the wind took it away. The cigarette was smooth and white in the glow of the street lamps. It was cool in the air. It was perfect. What she would like to do would be to sit on the ground, leaning against a building, and smoke that cigarette, listening to the sounds of people talking, deals being made, business, while she inhaled and exhaled and thought about getting stoned. There was this building downtown where you could get a beer and dope anytime, and there was this asshole that hung out there named Reese's like the pieces, and he was always grabbing her tits and anyone else's. One time she and her friend Samantha, gave him a joint that had a load in it and watched him smoke it until it popped in his face and he was all stoned and everything and pissed his pants. It was the funniest thing they'd ever seen, and he never felt her tits again. Karen turned the cigarette over and over in her fingers. If she smoked it, he would smell it on her breath, surely taste it at least. When they went to bed, he always kissed her goodnight. Sometimes he even kissed her hand, or her fingers, Because he frequently held her hand, tears stung her eyes. Ropes tightened around her chest. She brought the cigarette up under her nose and closed her eyes and sniffed, deeply. She lit the end of it with a match, without touching it to her lips. She lifted it, lit end down, to help it burn. She inhaled the air around the cigarette. Could say the man at the store was having a cigarette, smelled like sitting around having a beer. Having a few laughs. Smelled good. She put it to her lips and inhaled. The smoke, foreign tasting, not at all what she remembered and yet still good, hurt her throat and her lungs and felt good. She let it out. She closed her eyes, and did it again. Smelled like whore, being drunk, getting fucked, stealing, puking. Karen smoked and cried, "Should we make a baby?" Ted whispered in her ear. He always said that before he made love to her, slowly and thoughtfully, as though he needed or wanted permission at each step. She answered him by pressing her body against him, in the same slow thoughtful way that in the beginning this ritual amused her, and she almost found it contemptuous. Later she began to look forward to the routine of it, the safety in the knowing. Now when she pressed her body against his, she could sometimes blank her mind out in such a way that her body wanted his in an innocent way, the way a wife wants a husband, the way a woman might want a baby. Her body would never accept a baby. Ted didn't know and she would never tell him, but her womb and ovaries and vagina, up past the place where his penis reached, and her eggs and her uterus, and all of it was full of worms and fungus and dark red blood that was poisonous. He could never know that, and she would never tell him. Sometimes when she had already pressed her body against his in and swirled him, when he had his hand on her breast and was stroking it, and when he would kiss her very gently on the mouth, she stopped thinking, and for 1 second, until she felt it and stopped, she would feel white and clean and warm and pure and ready for him and his babies. As soon as that happened, the snakes came back and they reminded her of secrets. That happened less now, and once or twice, it hadn't happened at all, until the first thrust of his penis into her blackness. Then she remembered, she would cry for him if she thought it would mean anything. The accidental murder, the socially acceptable, fatal disease. The apologetic sin, the damage done. "I'm sorry, I am a sorrow." She went for a walk sometimes. If Ted was busy in the garage, fixing things, making new things that would break later and he could fix, sitting, sipping his beer, she would poke her head through the doorway and say she was popping out to the store. That was exactly how it happened. She poked her head in, and popped out. She was at her finest when she was lying. It was honesty that made her seem like she was lying. When she really lied, she was infallible. Karen walked farther now, past the store, past the industrial park, past the highway, up to where the lights got brighter, and there was some traffic. For a long time she just stood on the corner where the highway divided the suburb from the rest of the world, and she would stare at the flashing lights. She had hidden the pack of cigarettes under an industrial garbage can on top of a rock, and they had stayed mostly dry. She would have one cigarette when she went on her walks. She didn't feel like she was getting addicted again, but at various, random times of the day she would check herself. "Do I want to smoke?" The answer, whether true or not, was always no. She stood on the corner of Suburbia and the rest of the world, and watched the sign flash eddies. It flashed off and on. There was no apostrophe to show the possessive. Karen at least knew that much, even with her limited education, and so she wondered if it was perhaps some inside joke, as though 3 Orpha Eddies owned the bar, and they all had their names on the sign. She eventually convinced herself that was true, and laughed at their little joke herself. Underneath the sign was another that read, "Dancers." She just looked, and then moved on. Home she was always careful now to bring along gum and a Rolade, which seemed to effectively hide the smell of the cigarette. She washed her hands carefully when she got home, and put off kissing him as long as possible to give the mouthwash gum Rolade a chance to do its work. She stopped at the store and bought some little doodad so that Ted would know where she had been. "Did you enjoy your walk?" "Yes, I did," she said. "Would you like some toast?" She was so smooth, Jane Meyer invited her to a wedding shower. "Bring something," she told her. She hadn't been able to bring herself to ask what exactly she was supposed to bring, or what she was supposed to wear. She didn't feel right asking Ted. Her mother was of course dead and she had never met her father, although she told Ted for convenience's sake that he too was dead. Who could she ask? She brought home 6 magazines. There was Modern Bride, Today's Bride, Ladies' Home Journal, Country Living, Glamour, and Today's Woman. They all featured a beautiful, delicate-looking woman on the front, and the brides' magazines featured lovely, clean, pure brides. It was Laurie Perkins who was getting married. It was a second marriage, and Karen had no idea if that made any difference or not, but Jane had said in such a way that it sounded both as though it might, and Karen must know how it's a second marriage, you understand. No, the magazines told her nothing. The clothes were beautiful, and there was a good article in one of them about how child actors had their lives ruined by fame and money. Karen could just imagine. They knew nothing, but she bet they had their share of secrets. She felt gleeful after reading that article, but forgot to put fabric softener in 2 loads of laundry, and the socks clung to the shirts. It was 6 of one, half dozen of the other, as Ted would have said. By the end of that day she hadn't figured out what to wear, but had decided that she would bring flowers. Flowers were associated with weddings in all of the magazines, and they were so beautiful, perhaps no one would see through her. The shower had gone over without a hitch. Ted had smiled at her when she left the house. "You're looking so pretty. I don't know if I want you to go anywhere," he told her, looking her over in a way that he rarely did. She was so familiar with that look that she snapped back from the robot dressing, flower carrying, supper dishes done, there's a cold roast in the fridge if you get hungry, and felt her eyes narrow and turn hard. Did he see? She stopped in time. The flowers were in a clear plastic box, provided by the flower shop. Karen had tied a ribbon around the middle of the box, slightly hiding the flowers inside, but allowing them to peek seductively through. That was advice of the magazine. It was supposed to be for centerpieces being stored in the refrigerator, but Karen had adapted the idea, and was quite satisfied with it. She had decided upon a red blouse with a black skirt, not too short, not so long that her legs didn't show. Her legs were smooth and long, and like the flowers, might be something she could hide behind. She wore nail polish, a light pink that clashed with the blouse, but no one wore red anymore. Act normal, the flowers were a big hit. Laurie called them chic. "Oh, so chic," she squealed when she saw them, in a brittle, half-hysterical way that made Karen do a double take. She'd heard herself talking that way in the very beginning. She watched Laurie carefully after that, but never heard it again. She did see Jane looking at her skirt, and later saying something to someone in a surreptitious way. The others were wearing fat dresses and pants. She was dressed wrong, and she suspected the flowers weren't chic at all, but were wrong. She wished for a cigarette but never got one that night. It wasn't long before she crossed the street to look at Eddie's. She would carry her cigarette over there and smoke outside the building. She could hear the voices inside, laughing, the music, the clinking glasses. She imagined herself saying it. "Just stopped in for a drink, hun, I got so thirsty. Want some toast?" She would just have a Coke, smoke a cigarette, while she imagined the Coke. Some men drove by in a car and shouted out the window at her, and laughed. It was that kind of place. The first night she crossed, she didn't go in. Want to make a baby? They were sitting at the breakfast table. Karen's eyes were carefully hooded, as she had to be careful in the morning, when she was tired and more of her real self was awake than her home self. She looked at him tiredly, wondering what he meant, assuming that he was just making a little husband-wife joke, since his sperm was stilling her, running out, soaking into her underpants and robe. She would wash cloths again today. She smiled. "I mean it," he said, seriously. He looked deep into her eyes, and she knew that he couldn't see anything unseemly there. She became very aware of the feel of his sperm running out of her. It felt warm on her cool skin. Because it had been in her body. Because truth hurts. He reached over and took her hand. He lifted her fingers to his mouth and put one in his mouth. "I mean it, sweetheart. Darling. Let's go again this time, we'll make a baby." His voice got husky and deep with desire. She stared blankly at him, but let herself be led away. One time this guy in a bar who looked like a nice guy way back when she was still to learn that there was no such thing, before she met Ted and found out there was this guy who seemed really decent, and offered to give her a ride home on his motorcycle. She was a little drunk and feeling like she should be nice because he was nice and maybe he would like her if she was nice, and then the motorcycle ride would be something they did together. He took her for a ride and stopped in this park and fucked her without taking his pants off, even, just pulled them down. He took all of her clothes off, though. She refused to feel bad about it. She stole his pot. It was Tuesday and Karen was at the old folks' home. She was reading to Margaret. When they got to something that Karen couldn't read, she just pretended. Margaret was very hard of hearing and Karen suspected she only really liked the attention. Karen loved to read for her. While Karen read to Margaret, she noticed that the old woman would sometimes zone out, as though her mind had simply ceased to function. Her eyes would go blank, the muscles in her face would go slack. Where did she go? At those times Karen would wonder if Margaret was dying. She looked so peaceful. That was what peace would look like not thinking at all, Margaret. Karen would whisper. So far, she always answered. It wouldn't be long though, and Karen looked forward to Margaret's peace. Karen lay on her back and her husband moved up and down above her. She couldn't let go, her muscles, every muscle in her body, was tensed and panicked. What if? What if? She went in. She walked in as though it was something she did every single day. As though she wasn't Mrs. Karen Stevens, but was Karen. Or Kren, she used to be. Insides of those bars all looked the same. The same people sat at the same tables, their backs against the wall as though they were actually important enough for someone bad to be looking for. Gimme a club, she told the bartender that it was early, 10:30. She could smell the urine coming from the men's washroom, where last night or today someone must have pissed on the weighing. She used to laugh when someone did that. Underneath the beer and piss and cigarettes you could smell the more sinister smells, puke, pot, blood. The music for a dancer came on. Kren kept her back to the stage. The bartender put the beer in front of her. She was only going to have a Coke, but it was as if the place had overwhelmed her, as though the last 3 years had stripped the first 30 from her, and here she was, back at why déjà vu, she whispered. The bartender looked disgusted at her. She wished she had a cigarette, but that would be going too far. Got a smoke? She asked the bartender. I ain't a fucking store. Go buy a pack, he said. He gestured to the machine in the corner, a dark corner, of the bar. There was a man sitting at the table right next to the machine. He was drunk, or at least, he looked pretty drunk. Kren knew the people in this bar, especially the men. A lot of them would be married. None of them would be like Ted. These ones were the bored ones, the ones that expected something different out of life but were too stupid to go get it themselves, but too smart to live without it. She was suddenly so lonely for Ted, for home. Gimme some change then, she said, and handed the bartender at 20. While he got her change, in quarters, she took a gulp of her beer, delicately wiping her mouth with her fingers. The quarters slipped in with a familiar ching, dropping into slots in an organized, determined, deadly way. Kren looked up at the stage where the woman was taking her clothes off in a bored, off-key way. Only one man watched, and his eyes never left her. She reached out to push the select button. What the fuck? The taste of the beer was in her mouth. Not the taste of beer that was there during, say, the backyard barbecue they'd had with the Mayers this summer, where Gary Mayers had cooked hot dogs for their 2 kids and Karen had helped Jane make her famous warm potato salad, and Ted had put his arm around her waist and given her a tickle every chance he got just to hear her say. He told her after, Ted. How had that beer tasted? That whole day had had a taste to it, and now, in retrospect, she thought it tasted like that sour topping they used in place of sour cream in cheap restaurants. It tasted exactly real, just like real sour cream when you first put it in your mouth, wrapped up in your baked potato, or your warm potato salad, and then when you weren't thinking about it, it turned to wax in your mouth and you couldn't taste anything else. Wax beer. Beeswax. Fuck you and the horse you. Kren pushed Marlborough. Already, she could smell them. At 11:30 Ted wondered about his wife. He supposed that she had run into someone and was just visiting over a cup of tea or something. He smiled when he imagined that. A cup of tea. Tea wasn't exactly her cup of tea, as it were, but she had developed a taste for simpler things since they'd been together. You never know, he thought, smiling. He checked the clock on his way into the bedroom. Midnight. She was drunk. She couldn't have articulated it in her state, but in the deepest, darkest part of her mind, where the snakes and awfuls and bad swear, it was as though something had shifted and the world was once more in balance. She was where she belonged and Ted was where he belonged. Suburbia was smoke-free, it knew when to say when, it knew safe from sex. She was dancing with the man who couldn't take his eyes off the dancer. He was holding her too close. Beeswax, her mind had slipped to the place where Margaret's went when Karen saw her zone out. She was at peace. The anger she remembered wanting to feel was dissipated. If the imagined car with a stranger in it ready to abduct her were to appear, the anger would by then have turned to fear. Don't kick me, fuck you and the horse. They didn't really talk, although sometimes the man breathed in her ear. Words she couldn't hear or wasn't listening to. Words she'd heard before, the intent clearer than language. There was the same rhythm always, let's get out of here. That's how it was when the man led her away, to his car, opened the back seat instead of the front. She got in, a fluid, remembered motion coming more easily to her than spinning the dryer dial to 40 minutes, than snapping clean sheets over the naked bed. You're a sly one, Aunt Cha? You don't say much. You do your talking with your body, don't Cha? Hey! His hands were the hundreds of hands from forever and always. A part of her slackened, settled in for the duration, her mind shut off. It didn't last. Karen Stevens. She should have brought a cake to the shower. Food, there should have been someone to tell her, some way to find out. There never was. Never. There was never any way to know what she was supposed to do. She realized too late that it wasn't Ted. They weren't making a baby. Her hands curled into fists and she hit him, as hard as she could. So sorry, he shouted, and it sounded good. She beat against him, pulling his hair, trying to smash him with her knee, while he squirmed above her, grunting and screaming, hey, and pausing long enough to look at her. His eyes. Karen plunged her thumbs into his eyes so he would never ever see her, and she dug in. He screamed. Blood ran over her hands, down her arms, into the sleeves of her blouse. Secrets flew out in all directions. The story ends here. Thank you for watching the video. Please subscribe to the channel to catch more exciting stories.